leave the meeting.
Okay, great. Well, it's really a great pleasure for me to have Lesley Cheesman with me today. And obviously we're talking around the launch of my new book, I See You, which is about transforming team culture. And Lesley and I have known each other a few years, and it's just really good to have her on talking about leadership. Lesley, as we kind of kick this podcast off, perhaps you could just sort of tell us a bit about yourself, what you're up to at this point and your kind of leadership role. That would be great.
Certainly. Hi, Mark. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on here. Like you say, we go way back, and there's a few stories I could tell, but that's not for this podcast.
Thank you.
So I live in Birmingham, married for 32 years and have 2 grown children. And I've been involved I work for Agapè, which is part of a global organization, a global charity. And I've worked with Agapè for the last 33 years, in fact, just a bit longer than I've been married. And I've had various roles within the organization over that 33 years. But for the last 10 years, I've been the CEO of Agapè. And that's just been quite the ride.
I bet. Yeah, that's great. It's really good to see. Is it 10 years already? I can't believe that.
Yeah.
Well, that's brilliant. So perhaps just as a kind of kick-off question then, who would you say has influenced you the most as you set about leading?
Well, that's such an interesting question. And in fact, I probably couldn't think of one person in particular, Mark. As I think about the sort of span of my life, I recently did a sort of a weekend tour of my childhood with my daughter, and it was so fun to remember back to significant things that happened through particularly my childhood. And one of the things I reflected on was how important being in guiding was for me,
right,
in terms of having an opportunity to be exposed to what all the things that guiding brings, but also leadership. And so when I think about people that have influenced me in leadership, it does actually go way back to my experience as a young teenager of being led, and also having opportunities to lead in that context. And also my youth leaders as a teenager, but also the people that have led me over the years, sort of those that have been sort of close-up leaders, and also those who have led from afar, if you like.
Yeah.
And so I sort of think, I feel like I've been influenced by a wide variety of people that I've known, that I've experienced their leadership in my life, but also people that, I read about from history, or I see leading today in, even at government level, dare I say that. So I think my leadership has been influenced by a wide variety of people, but I would say that as a person of faith, that actually Jesus has probably had the greatest influence on me, on what it looks like to lead.
Yeah, brilliant. Are there particular things that you see in other leaders that you think, these are things that I would follow? Are there particular things that you admire about them that kind of attract you towards them?
I think the first thing I would say, Mark, is how they treat people. How somebody treats another person, particularly if it's not a person who they have to treat well.
Right.
So it's how does somebody treat another person? That's true for me, whoever they are, whether they're leaders or not. But I think particularly in leadership, the focus on people is always something that I really value and admire. And I think a person who is also, it seems to be really themselves as a leader. They're not sort of putting a leadership hat on and having to be somebody completely different as that leader from who they are in their everyday lives. And sort of that integrity of kind of a holistic nature of who a person is and how that comes out in their leadership. It kind of helps for me to grow trust in leaders.
Okay.
That there's a good match between what they do in their day-to-day work and their leadership responsibility, and who they are at home and how they are with other people and other situations. So I think that's always been important to me. But beyond that, the sort of how they treat people and the integrity of who they are as a person, for me is also this sense of a person who can believe something much bigger than themselves,
right,
and have belief for a future that they can bring people along to create. Does that
yeah,
make sense?
yeah, yeah,
So a person of real clear vision,
yeah,
and yeah, that for me is always a courageous leader in many respects, and but really critically that it's never about themselves as the leader. In some respects, it's possibly why it's hard to think of one leader, because it's almost like they're a little bit invisible,
yeah,
which is ironic in their leadership, but because they don't make it about themselves, it's
yeah.
about what they're doing with a group of people together towards a particular future.
Yeah, sounds brilliant. Yeah, yeah. So that clarity of vision, something that they've got a compelling vision of the future that they want to draw other people into.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, I guess in terms of talking about people who kind of are invisible, I guess though that humility must play quite a big part in that.
Oh, hugely, hugely. And it's like you say, it's not about themselves. And I think humility and servant-heartedness in leadership is absolutely vital. That, like for me, the organization isn't to serve me as the CEO. My job is to serve the organization and to take us to a place where we can make a difference. And so I think there needs to be a huge amount of humility, but also security and confidence. Humble confidence. Does that make sense? I'm not sure
Yeah,
that's
it does. Yeah.
phrase, but I think confidence is really actually very important in leadership. But it's because of a sense there has to come such a strong sense of humility in that, and not pride, which is obviously often a great downfall for a leader.
Yeah, there's a few examples in there around. No, that's great. It kind of brings me on to Lesley, the kind of stuff I talk about in the book about the leader's motive. And I know that you probably have seen this yourself, that Patrick Lencioni's written a book in the last couple of years about the leader's motive, and it's kind of said, I wish I'd written this 10 years ago. But what would you say are good motives in terms of being, wanting to, I mean, people do want to be leaders, not for the wrong reasons, but what would you say good motivations for leadership?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I think aspiring to leadership is actually a noble thing, but not for it to be about yourself, but it's because you want to be a part of creating something in the future. And I think that's something that's really important, that that being motivated into leadership is because you see something that you believe will make a difference, and you want to be a part of making that happen. And you believe that you can bring people, because leadership has to be about people, because otherwise what are you leading? You believe you can bring a group of people along with you to make a difference in the future. And I think that's highly motivating for me, when you see that something that isn't now that could be in the future, and you feel that you can bring your best contribution to enable that to happen.
No, that's really good. So if you were to consult your younger self, Lesley, looking back, what would be one or two things that perhaps you would tell the younger Lesley about leadership that you now know?
That's a great question. I think one of the areas of leadership that I've always found challenging, I find it challenging just as a person, is dealing with conflict, and seeing conflict as a negative thing. And the thing that I've learned is actually conflict is a really good thing. Positive conflict. We get all sorts of conflict happen in the world. You have wars, which is conflict. I'm not meaning that kind of conflict, but the healthy conversations and critical conversations, and to have courage to have those critical conversations, actually enables greater things to happen. And if I could tell my younger self something, it would be, don't avoid the critical conversations, and don't see as having differing opinions and differing views and challenges as something that is detrimental to to you as a person or where you're going to be. And I think, you know, that it's not easy to have, you know, it's not always easy to have those hard conversations. It's easy to avoid them and think that they, you know, will just get beyond it. But actually, it's having the hard conversation that some of the gold is mined in what you're trying to do together with a group of other people, and you get the very best out of other people when you create an environment that enables those kind of critical conversations to happen. But it all has to be in an environment, I think, of being sort of caring for other people, valuing another person's opinion, not being about driving your own opinion and your own perspective, but creating an environment where you can sort of not agree about things. And I think sort of that for me is creating a creative environment for a team. Like I say, it brings out gold, I think, when you enable those critical conversations, or crucial conversations is possibly a better way of phrasing it, to happen. And if I could sort of mentor my younger self, I'd say lean into those crucial conversations more. Because that's where really exciting things happen.
Certainly dynamic in those kind of situations.
Exactly. Definitely.
I think it's interesting when you think about conflict, we see it as a negative word, but actually what I would call creative disagreement is actually really important, isn't it? If we, you know, when you think about the things that you discuss, 9 times out of 10, they're going to be things that matter. So, you know, why would you not be passionate about what you think? And I think, as you say, creating the right environment for that to happen, and having, I guess, for want of a better term, rules of engagement, that makes it all the more exciting. So that's really good. Brilliant.
Because I think sometimes we think about that sort of those crucial conversations being sort of one person against another person, and actually if you both sit, you know, if you're thinking of as a team, if you're all sitting on the same side of the issue and saying together, we want to tackle this from different angles, we want to mine the different perspectives that we all have and our different experiences and understanding, and it become about the issue rather than about another person.
Absolutely.
But I also think that it's the willingness and the desire to lean in when there has been a misunderstanding between people, and seeking to bring resolution and understanding rather than stepping away from relationships when things get difficult, because inevitably in teamwork times it can get very tense, and you know, and I think it's interesting, having been through the pandemic, how limited teamwork is on a screen, particularly in understanding how, you know, if you've had a discussion about something, how someone else experienced that discussion, because you don't have sort of those opportunities over coffee to recognize, oh, this person's not really seeming to want to engage with me. Is there an issue? Does that make sense? And I think, you know, that the desire to lean into, if there's, you know, just personal connection and build it, because I think in leadership, being well connected with your team is absolutely vital. And if you're not sort of dealing with, you know, issues on an interpersonal level as well as on an organizational level, you don't build those greater connections with each other, and those relationships, which I think are vital. Good relationships is absolutely vital. Great teamwork.
Definitely, and the relationships built in the wrestling through things, isn't it? So that's really good. Brilliant. So thinking in terms of you know, the team leadership, what characteristics, I mean, you've talked about this a little bit already, but you know, if there were 1 or 2, maybe 3 things that you thought a leader can do to really contribute to teams performing better, what would they be?
I think one of them is it comes down to our relationships, and I think it's really important to know each other, and to create an environment where you can really get to know each other as people. It's not just the role that you have or the responsibilities that you have within your team or your organization, but it's actually seeing each other and knowing each other as people. And so I always value the importance of having people around for dinner,
Right.
or going somewhere with people and doing things that are outside of the meeting room, if you like.
Yeah.
Knowing each other's families, and taking into it. And it's interesting because I think this is one of the things that's been interesting through the pandemic, because for more people, they've seen into each other's worlds, literally, because they are seeing into each other's worlds, because they're sitting at home, and their kids are coming in the room, and they're and I think that's just been a great thing, because there's been this sense of, I am more than just what I do here at work. And I think that is really important for teams to succeed, is actually each other, and you're leaning in with each other, and you're treating people in a holistic way. That's always really, really important. And I think leaning in with people and giving them space to other people's space to shape things, I think is really important. Collaborative, that's something that I highly value, as a collaborative environment where everyone has a clear voice at the table, and everyone sort of they know that their contribution is valued and welcomed. And that's also really important. And I think sometimes in teams, we don't even know what each other are capable of.
Right.
And so actually, how do you I think it's important to create an environment where you're able to share what you can contribute beyond what people already know and understand is your contribution. Does that make sense? And sometimes, one of the best things that I think I've done with my team, one of my teams in the past, is to go on a trip together. We went on a humanitarian trip together to Greece, working in a refugee camp. And we thought we were going there to simply do some good work, to make a difference in this refugee camp. But what I hadn't really anticipated was how much more we'd understand about one another through doing things that were completely different to our everyday work. Through, the kind of the manual things that we had to do, the kind of ways that we had to practically help out in the camp, enabled me to understand more about my team members, who they are characteristically, but also what they had to contribute beyond what is their normal everyday work that I'd sort of experienced them in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, definitely. And I think, taking your team outside the normal environment, putting us in situations we're not used to as well, it kind of mines the stuff that's underneath, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And I loved it in that situation. What I loved was that I wasn't really the leader in that context. There were other members of my team that were much more sort of proficient at dealing with the situation that we were in. So that was just such a fun dynamic to see, that kind of peer connection and others leading in those situations. Yeah, I would highly recommend that to any person leading a team, to take their team out of their normal working environment. It's super fun, which I think is really important for teams.
Absolutely.
You get to know each other, and you see each other's responses under stress, and it's fascinating.
Yeah, I can imagine it was a rich experience. I think you kind of touched on it a bit, but I think humor and having fun as a team is so important. It's not, that I always had a phrase in my mind that if you kind of put some kind of thing on your desk just to remind you, I think it would be, don't take yourself too seriously.
That is so important, Mark, and I absolutely agree. For me, it's quite a strong barometer of how well our team are doing. Is there laughter? Are we having fun? But conversely, I think it's also really important to lament with one another, and I think it comes back to my comment earlier about enabling people to bring their whole selves to work into the team. That actually you can laugh together and you cry together because you're experiencing that. It's an emotionally intelligently rich environment that you create for your team. And but even in the hardest times, you can create a sense of joy as well in the team. So definitely, I think fun is a great barometer for the health of your team. And
Yeah.
I highly recommend finding creative ways for having more fun.
Definitely. And there are many.
There are many.
Yeah, no, that's good. I mean, one of the reasons I have written the book is obviously to help teams become, the place where you can make your best contribution, where every voice can be heard, where people can be creative, be innovative, have those kind of wrestling with and collaborative experiences. But I have realized, and it's why I've called it leadership principles, it's the leader who sets the culture. I mean, from your point of view, how crucial is leadership for you in terms of the team performing to its potential?
Yes, I don't think it can be underestimated, the importance of the role of the leader in creating that culture. It's not about the leader being important, but their role in the team is really important for creating a culture of thriving. And you set the tone by what you encourage, what you sort of give space to, and what you shut down.
Absolutely.
And, I think that, for me, what's really important in any team I've led is that there's a sense of, we know why we're here. That's really important, that as a leader, you sort of, you enable the conversation to happen, so that people are all clear about why we've gathered a team, what we're choosing to exist for.
Yeah.
And so when you're really clear about what you're trying to do together, why this team actually exists, sort of really being clear on what each has to play, what role you each have to play in the success of that team's purpose, if you like. And ensuring that solid communication happens. I think communication is absolutely essential to the thriving of a team. And so as a leader, for me as a leader, I don't make the decisions around all those things, but I set an environment which says, together we're going to make some decisions around why we're here. For me, inviting people into particular key roles, but enable people then to flourish and to bring the best out of each other in the team, I think is also important. So the leader is really critical in creating the culture and the environment, but it's to enable it to be nurtured rather than stating what it should be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. It's not, you're not necessarily, you're saying this is where we're going. And there are several ways of getting there, and I'm interested in the way you might go. You might not be the way I do it, but it's exactly, it can still work, or maybe work better, so.
Because I think it is around your relationships, the kind of how you build a culture around the kind of relationships that you have with one another. And any team I've worked on, it's never just the function of the team, it's the who we are as people and our relationships with one another. It's really important. But that we're going together somewhere. And so to create a plan together, that we each have a vital part to play in the success of that plan, and that we're all accountable to one another, including me as the leader, for the things that we've said we're going to do in order to get to the future that we want to get to. And so it is absolutely vital as a leader that, one of the things I've been thinking a lot about recently is how much space am I creating for myself to be able to think about things in order to serve my team well in where we're going. I think, question earlier about what would I tell my younger self is to not be afraid of giving myself space to think and to read, in order to be well prepared in leading my team forward. So I think that's also very, very important. But the team does create and one of the things I talk about is being very present with your team, that actually, if I can't be vulnerable and open with my team, how do I think that that's going to happen elsewhere? So how do you yourself model what you want to be true of your team? So that's absolutely vital.
No, that's really good. I think we do sometimes wonder whether, setting aside time and space to think and to read or to whatever it is useful. And I know that I remember John Maxwell saying, I have a chair in my office and that is where I do my thinking. It's that he actually moves chairs and goes and sits in a different place to kind of do it, but because it's so important.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing. And, and I think one of the things that I do, and I encourage all my teams to regularly, is to take time to retreat away from everyday activity, to just, go somewhere else. For me, it's walking. Going for a long walk on my own is great thinking time.
Yeah.
But it's so important for our own emotional health, as well as our ability to have the space to, particularly in the environment that we're leading in today, it's not straightforward and simple. No. There's so much uncertainty and insecurity, and things are changing so fast that if we're, as leaders, we're not creating the space for that thinking, and to sort of to be inquisitive. This is one of the characteristics I think is really important for a leader, including with your team, is to be inquisitive, because when you're inquisitive, you start to ask really good questions. But you need to create some space to even think about that.
Yes, it's always being curious. I mean, when I'm coaching people, I always say, well, I'm not going to be judging you. I'm just going to be curious as to why you didn't do things or what it is that's moving you that way. But curiosity, definitely, should have the same curiosity you had when you were a kid, really, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's one of the ways you create the environment in your team is if as a leader you spend all your time making statements, you're not going to get anything out of your team. Whereas if the vast majority of your time in your team is asking really good questions, that's, I think, very helpful to a team and to enable them to thrive and to bring their very best to the table.
Absolutely. No, that's brilliant. One of the themes I tackle in ICU is about what I call love-led leadership, which I guess is in contrast to leading out of fear, which in my experience, most leaders do battle with almost constantly sometimes. So what are the benefits that you have discovered in kind of, I'm picking up that this is kind of something that would be at the core of you, led by love, if you like. How does that contrast with how leading out of fear, do you think?
Well, I think when you lead out of love, it's a very others orientated kind of approach to your responsibility as a leader. When we lead out of fear, it becomes the focus much more on ourselves, and our own insecurities and our own anxieties and our own concern. And I think it's very, very important as a leader to deal with your own insecurities, actually, and to have really good people in your life that you can be that blatantly honest with, where you can say, actually, this is like the stuff underneath that is not very pretty, and I don't really like talking about it. I don't even like admitting it to myself, but for my own emotional health, it's really, really important. And so I think being a leader that doesn't lead out of fear or insecurity is absolutely vital to, do the work on yourself here. And it's incredible when you lead out of love and you really care genuinely about the people that you're leading. When you really have their best in your mind, and you want to create an environment where people thrive, they're nurtured, not in a patronizing way, but the environment itself enables people to thrive and grow and become even more than they themselves imagined that they could be. It's just incredibly exciting and life-giving environment to be in. And so I do think it's important to genuinely care about the people that you work with.
Yes.
It's not just something I should do because that's what leaders do, but actually I really care, and I want to know the people, who they are, and what makes them tick, what makes them thrive. I said earlier, one of my greatest influences in leadership, if not the greatest influence, I would say, in my leadership, is Jesus. He talks a lot about how you treat other people.
Sure.
And a description of what love is. It's patient, it's kind, it doesn't envy, it's not boastful. And so I think there are some of those descriptors that are so great if you think about a team culture and environment that is patient and kind and generous and self-controlled, and it's not boastful or envious of other people's success, but champions other people's success, and leans in and laments with failures, as it's say. And I think one of the ways that we lead with love is to not just say it's okay, but to promote risk taking. Because when we lead with fear, we don't like to take risks. Because what if it goes wrong? Whereas if we lead with love, we create an environment where people can take risks, can work things out, can learn. It creates a learning environment where we discover things that we don't know yet. And particularly in the world that we're living in, the importance for leaders and teams to discover what we don't know yet has just gone up to another level.
Definitely. I mean, we come into a place where things like technology take-up has moved on very fast, and the way that we think that we can do work has changed. I think I'm with you in the sense that I don't think you can get rid of that meeting together physically, because I think there's a different dynamic about that. But it certainly has made a question, do I need to travel to see that person, or can I do this in a different way? Or so there's all those kinds of things around. And I think it's interesting you say that about a learning environment, because often we have a kind of environment where it's a culture of blame, and that kind of shuts down conversation, stops people speaking up, that kind of thing. I know that it always amazes me that we don't adopt the same kind of attitude as the airline industry, where if there's a problem, you better report it, otherwise you're out of a job.
Right. Absolutely.
Absolutely. So I think it's that kind of what they call black box thinking, isn't it? Kind of thinking about, okay, well, as long as it's not you're not repeating something that's a competency issue, but if we're trying new things, then it's a learning process, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think teams that are not sort of valuing and promoting a learning environment will struggle to lead into the future. And it's one of the things that I going back to the football, it's painful memory, but one of the things I really loved about the Euro finals and the England's response was that sense of it wasn't a blame sort of response. It was the team wins together and loses together. And I think that's really important, and it stops the team being about the individuals and people and if we make it individuals that sit around a table, then everyone feels a bit exposed, everyone feels a bit vulnerable. Nobody feels like everyone's got somebody's got my back here. Whereas actually if there's a sense of we are one team, we are working together towards a purpose, we really care about each other, and we care about succeeding together as a team. We believe everybody's got something really important to bring to the table, and we want to have an environment where that flourishes and grows. Then the team are more able and robust to take risks, and it's interesting how you even define what failure is as a team, because I think taking risks and something didn't work the way that you hoped it would is not necessarily a failure. No. It's a learning point. It's okay.
That's right.
You just think that's really, really, if a child gets up, is learning to walk, and they make 2 steps, they fall down. We don't think they failed at walking. We think, okay, they've learned a bit more today about what it takes to walk across the room, and I think as a team, what are we learning together about what it takes to get to the future that we're trying to create? I think that's an exciting team to be a part of, whether you're leading it or you're just a part of it. That for me is an exciting team to be a part of. And it's an agile team. There's a lot of conversation in the leadership world around agile teams at the minute, and being highly adaptable in your leadership. And I think if you really want to be an adaptable leader, creating an agile team, then risk-taking and experimentation and learning is the thing that you're going after.
Yeah, definitely.
Rather than getting everything right.
Absolutely. Yeah. Lesley, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. I think in terms of what you've spoken about leadership, and particularly as we're coming out of the pandemic, yes, we need to be agile, but you're right. I think if you've got that created expectation in the team that, yeah, you know, look, I'm finding this as difficult as you are, but we still know where we're going. We still know that there's things that we can do. There's things that we're certain about in that kind of way, but also showing that you're a real human being and taking your team with you. So it's been great to talk to you. The kind of things we've spoken about are the kinds of things that you'll find in the book, and hopefully will be, you know, practical things that people can use and apply in their own team situation to kind of see the teams that you've been talking about today. So thank you very much for coming on to do this.
Thanks so much for having me, Mark. It's been a real joy.
Yeah, great. Until next time.